Hey everyone, and welcomes to the channel. What makes Lauren London's presence in the public imagination so enduring is not a steady stream of updates, but the opposite. A sustained sense of distance that has slowly reshaped how audiences think about visibility itself. In a cultural moment where almost everything is expected to be documented in real time, her approach has created a kind of quiet interruption in that expectation. It forces a different pace of attention, one that doesn't rely on constant access to feel connection. Over time, that shift has changed the tone of how people speak about her. Early conversations were often framed by curiosity, what she was doing when she would return, whether she would speak more openly. But as the years have passed, that curiosity has matured into something more reflective. There is now a growing understanding that not all silence is temporary, and not all distance is waiting to be closed. Some forms of privacy are not pauses in a story. They are part of the story itself. This is where her journey becomes less about celebrity culture and more about emotional architecture. Grief, in its most honest form, does not align with external timelines. It does not respond to industry schedules, public demand, or narrative structure. It moves in its own pattern, often invisible to everyone except the person living inside it. Lauren London's withdrawal from the spotlight, whether intentional in every detail or shaped by necessity, reflects that truth in a way that feels unusually unforced. There is a misconception in public life that absence creates distance between a person and their audience. But in her case, absence has done something more complicated. It has created space for interpretation, empathy, and projection. People fill silence with their own understanding, and in doing so, they often reveal more about themselves than the person they are observing. Her quietness has become a mirror in that sense, reflecting how uncomfortable society can be with unresolved emotional states. And yet what is striking is how that silence has never felt like disengagement. It has felt intentional, even when it is not explained. The rare moments where she appears publicly carry a kind of stillness that reads differently from typical celebrity visibility. There is no urgency to perform familiarity, no need to prove recovery, no pressure to translate life into digestible narrative beats. Instead, there is a sense of someone moving through life without negotiating every step for external approval. That difference is subtle, but it changes everything about how she is perceived. In many celebrity narratives, the expectation is transformation that can be clearly marked. The comeback, the interview, the reinvention, the public statement, but Lauren London's trajectory resists that structure. There is no clearly defined before and after that neatly explains her evolution. Instead, there is continuity life, continuing without needing to be divided into chapters for public consumption. In that continuity, parenting has often been understood as one of the grounding forces in her life. Not as a narrative device, but as a lived responsibility that does not pause for grief or public interest. It is one of the few aspects of life that demands presence, regardless of emotional state. And in that sense, it becomes part of the unseen structure supporting everything else. While the public sees moments, appearances, interviews, selective creative work, what remains unseen is the everyday reality that does not pause for attention. This is where the idea of healing in public becomes complicated. Society often expects visible markers of recovery, statements of closure, visible returns to previous energy, or clear indicators that someone has moved on. But real healing rarely looks like that. More often, it is uneven, inconsistent, and deeply private. It can include progress and regression in the same week. It can include silence, not as absence of thought, but as saturation of it. Lauren London's public silence, then, can be understood less as withdrawal from life and more as refusal to translate that complexity into simplified language. That refusal is not passive. It requires constant boundary setting in a world that often rewards oversharing. It also requires clarity about what parts of life are not meant for consumption, no matter how curious the audience becomes. There is also something important about how time has functioned in her narrative. In many public stories, time is used as proof of recovery, how long it has been, how far someone has come. what they have achieved since. But in her case, time feels less like evidence and more like environment. It is not being measured for external validation, it is being lived through internally, without needing to justify its pace. That difference is part of why public perception has gradually shifted. What once might have been interpreted as absence or uncertainty is now more often recognized as self-definition. People are increasingly aware that stepping out of a system that constantly demands visibility can be an act of preservation rather than disappearance. It challenges the assumption that staying relevant requires constant participation in public discourse. At the same time, there is still curiosity about whether she will ever fully return in the way audiences traditionally expect. But even that question is slowly changing shape. The idea of return implies departure from identity, as if she has been elsewhere and is now coming back to something she left behind. In reality, it may be more accurate to think of her as someone who never left her own life, only stepped out of its public interpretation. If she chooses to speak more openly in the future, it will likely not function as a resolution to a story already understood. It will not be a missing piece that completes a narrative. It will simply be another layer of expression from someone who has continued living beyond the frame that was once placed around her. And that distinction matters because it reframes expectation into respect. What remains consistent throughout all of this is the emotional response she evokes, not because of constant visibility, but because of what her absence represents. People recognize, consciously or not, the experience of needing distance in order to survive something deeply personal. That recognition is why her silence feels familiar, even to those who do not know her story intimately. It reflects a shared human experience that exists outside of fame. As this reflection comes to a close, what remains most clear is that Lauren London's story was never about constant visibility. It was about the space between visibility and silence, and everything a person learns inside that space. In a world that often rushes people to explain, to return, to prove healing on schedule, she chose something different. She chose time without performance, and healing without audience approval. And maybe that is why her presence still feels so strong even when she is not speaking. It reminds people that not every chapter is meant to be narrated in real time. Some chapters are lived quietly, away from expectation, where growth doesn't need witnesses and strength doesn't need applause. There is a kind of dignity in that choice that cannot be measured by headlines or appearances. As audiences continue to reflect on her journey, one thing becomes increasingly evident. Her silence was never emptiness. It was structure. It was protection. It was a way of holding life together when the world outside expected explanation for something deeply personal and unexplainable. And if there is anything to take from her story, it is this: healing does not have to look public to be real. It does not have to be fast to be meaningful. And it does not have to be spoken to be understood. Sometimes the most powerful voices are not the ones that speak the loudest, but the ones that choose carefully when and if to speak at all. And in that quiet space, her story continues unfolding, not for the world to consume, but for a life to simply be lived.